The cottage keeps time the way old bodies do, not with seconds, but with aches. It sits on the cliff like a held breath, shingled back hunched against the sea's cold grammar. The wind writes cursive on the windows. The tide speaks in ellipses. And somewhere beneath the floorboards a low, steady wheeze, with settling in a language of groans, says, "We remember. We remember. We remember." Lena lies on her side in the iron bed, facing the empty half where Cassian would sleep, if Cassian still slept. She keeps her palm on the cool indentation of his absent shoulder, pretending warmth into it. That's her ritual. She imagines him late, boots by the door, salt in his hair, the faint rasp laughter he used when the kettle misbehaved. She imagines the sigh of him, the way men sigh when they think no one is listening, the way the house used to soften at the sound. She builds him from habits. Habit is the most convincing ghost. Outside, the moon is a slice of bone. The sea flexes, dark as sleep. He's there, she tells herself, the way she does every night, and perhaps that is how spells begin, with a lie you cradle until it begins purring. The clock on the mantel coughs, falters, continues. 3:31. 3:32. Lena's breathing slows like a pendulum. Between waking and downdrifting, she hears the small nocturnal commerce of the cottage, a wire in the wall contracting, the stair that ticks twice, the kettle lid giving a modest tink as it cools. The house has an inventory of sounds she could identify in the dark by touch alone. And then, as always, at 3:33, the house breathes. It is subtle enough that visitors would blame the wind. But Lena has lived in this breath for years. She knows its articulation. The front door's latch eases, catching and releasing like lips. A floorboard in the hall lowers as if beneath a foot. The kitchen's old regulator valve exhales. A turn of air passes through the narrow pantry, like a body squeezing sideways. Every night, 3:33, as if some invisible thing returns to itself. Cassian had loved the way the cottage sounded at night. "It's an animal," he had said once, smiling into his coffee. "It curls around us while we sleep." He'd put his ear to the wall like a boy and say "show" when the pipes answered. And then, on a cold morning that tasted like tin, he had gone down to the shore and vanished into a weather the forecast hadn't promised. The town called it an accident. The sea called it nothing at all. Lena does not call it anything. Naming is a kind of ending. She waits now in the dark for the rest of the ritual. At 3:33 the house breathes, and then, if she does not move, if she keeps sleeping with her face turned toward the emptiness, there is sometimes a second breath, softer, nearer. As if the bed itself is practicing. As if the pillow beside her is remembering lungs. She does not move, does not breathe. And there, a faint disturbance on the sheet, a pressure like the footfall of a moth. A coolness passes beneath her hand into the hollow she keeps for Cassian's shoulder, as if the world is briefly cold enough to imagine without consequence. "Stay," she whispers, but she is also asleep, and the word collects on the back of her tongue like frost. Morning is a confession made of light. It never lies for you. It opens drawers. It points to the empty chair at the table and says, "See?" It highlights the dust on the nightstand and says, "See?" It banishes the breath from the house and replaces it with an honest quiet. The kettle on the stove is cool. The mug in the sink is dry. The door is bolted from the inside, the chain set. The boots by the door are paired as she left them. Nothing moves. Nothing admits. "Good," Lena says to nobody, and hates herself for how the word trembles. She keeps a notebook near the bread box. Today she writes, "Morning 482. Everything is left. House unhelpful. Dream of ice on tide pools. His scarf in the hall smelled of rain." And then she strikes out the last clause because the scarf is in a sealed tin in the top cupboard, and she has not smelled it since last spring. She won't court madness with matching perfume to emptiness. She makes coffee. The radio on the counter is an old thing with a dial that requires patience. Cassian insisted they keep it because modern radios sound like they only believe in future time. She lets the static crackle, scrolls through bits of weather and farm reports from towns with names like warnings. A woman's voice on the Maritime Channel lists small craft advisories in a tone you could marry. The coffee tastes like the first kind thing after bad news. When she turns back to the sink, there is a cup on the second shelf of the drying rack that she does not recognize. Older porcelain, hairline cracked like a smile, a faded blue ring of ivy around the lip. Not new, no, something forgotten. The sort of cup that appears when cupboards are less about storage than memory. She frowns, pulls it down. The cup is dustless. The crack is clean. She turns it in her hands and hears the faintest click as something inside the porcelain answers the pressure of her finger, like a tooth settling. Well, she says, too brightly, a hostess greeting a draft. You weren't invited. She holds the cup under the tap. The water catches in its bowl with a sound that makes her skin gooseflesh, a note she knows, a pitch she has heard while half asleep and happy. Cassian used to hum into the rims of glasses after dinner, coaxing music from edges. The cup does that now, a little, as if it remembers his mouth. She sets it on the counter with a soft clack and walks away. Behind her, the radio drops a thin seam of static and then, very quietly, without moving the dial, tunes to a band that doesn't exist. A man's voice, almost Cassian, says, "Nah, Lena," as if someone is waking on a staircase. She does not turn around. She puts both hands flat on the kitchen table as if bracing for a small quake. The part of her brain that keeps her alive says, "Don't." The part of her heart that keeps her breaking says, "Please." Silence. When she finally looks, the dial is where she left it. The maritime woman is back with the weather like a prayer. North-northeast wind increasing to 15 knots by nightfall. Lena breathes out through her teeth. "We are not doing this," she tells the house. "We are not playing games." The house listens with the dull pride of a body that knows it will outlast your tantrums. She takes the old cup to the sink, rinses it until the water's a scald, and places it upside down over the mouth of the measuring glass, trapping air beneath porcelain. A silly witchery, but it makes her feel that she has reversed a spell. Later she goes for groceries. The cliff road wears its usual grimace. The gulls practice their mean arithmetic in the wind. People nod at her with either too much gentleness or too much curiosity, spectators at a long grief. On the corkboard by the market's register, a flyer pinned by a tiny anchor-shaped thumbtack. Sable Halverson. Dream Surveys and Archive. Sleep Cartography. Night Architecture. Liminal Mapping. Free initial consult for coastal addresses. A dangling fringe of tear-off phone numbers. 3 are missing. The phrase sleep cartography is ridiculous. It lodges in her head. When Lena returns at dusk, the house smells faintly of boiled sugar. She freezes in the hall. The kitchen light is off. The room holds its breath like someone who hears a foot in the gravel path and doesn't want to be caught being themselves. She slips off her coat quietly, a burglar in her own life. The old cup is still upside down where she left it. A good sign, a human fact. She sets her groceries down with careful indifference and clicks on the lamp. On the table, a damp ring in the wood, dark as a bruise. Not fresh, not new, but not a stain from before. She would have oiled it. Lena stares at it the way one stares at a puddle in a locked room. She sets the pulp of her thumb in the ring's bite. It fits like a measurement. "Tea?" she says and laughs once, a sound that clearly hasn't practiced laughing for a while. The kettle complains as it heats. She listens for a tune from the rims of the cups, "Don't be foolish," and hears only metal expanding, the ordinary music of heat. That's worse, somehow. At 11:23 p.m., wrapped in a blanket on the sofa, she takes the flyer from her coat pocket and reads it twice. Sleep cartography. Nobody sane offers to map the places between waking and gone. She puts the flyer under the lamp and the light turns the thin paper into a small, pale window. "All right," she says to the house. "If you're trying to speak, you're choosing the coward's way. So we're going to be scientific. We're going to embarrass you." The house answers with a nice, loyal creak from the ceiling, the sound of an old dog rising to follow. She sets a chair in front of the bedroom door. Absurd, but like many absurdities it comforts. She ties a bell to the bathroom knob with red twine. She places a line of salt across the threshold to the kitchen, the way her grandmother did when her grandfather drank. She doesn't know if salt keeps ghosts out or grief in. Either is acceptable. Midnight. The wind leans its weight against the panes. The sea says, so? So? In its tireless way. She lies down. The bed is a shallow boat. The chair before the door is a small soldier. The bell on the bathroom knob is a promise. She sets her palm in the hollow beside her as she always does. A guilty ritual. If you're here, she says to the dark, we're going to do this right. The house mutters to itself in the bones of the walls. 3:31. Her breath a metronome. 3:32. The bell on the bathroom door is very quiet and very still. 3:33. The house breathes. H. Ah. The front latch loosens with the intimacy of a soft mouth. The floorboard in the hall lowers like a knee bending underweight. The air in the pantry passes through narrow shelves, counting. The chair at the bedroom door gives a small shiver as the door, which should not move, tests its own certainty against the chair's back. The bell on the bathroom knob replies with a ting so faint it might be a misheard memory. Lena does not move. The line of salt at the kitchen threshold is unbroken. She can't see it, but some part of her sees with the mind that arranged it. Her palm on the sheet feels the temperature change before skin can report it. The hollow beside her cools the way water cools when a cloud smothers the moon. Not cold, just less warm than a second ago, as though something declined to be warm. The bell, ting. Again, this time undoubtedly now. Stay, she whispers, and hears in the word a plea, a command, a prayer. In the same instant, the old upside-down cup in the kitchen answers with a note, clear, shy, like a sound rising with a bubble from river rock. It is the small hum of captured air escaping under porcelain. It is also Cassian tuning a glass with his fingertip, finding a pitch the way some men find keys in their pockets, without looking. Lena sits up. The chair shifts. The door holds. The bell is quiet again. The house, satisfied it has drawn her fully awake, stops performing and becomes simply a house. Dawn crawls up the cliff like a guilty thing. She dozes at last, not quite asleep, the way you do after a siren passes. When morning finally stands in the kitchen, unapologetic in its cold clarity, she goes to survey the scene. The bell is still tied, the knot tight. The chair's legs have bitten deeper into the rug pile, but haven't traveled. The salt line is unbroken, except for a single finger-width smudge near the threshold center, as if someone pressed there and then changed their mind about crossing. On the counter, the upside-down cup has slid 3 inches and now sits on the bare wood, not over the measuring glass where she left it. There is the damp ring, fresh now, nested inside last night's ring like years. She looks at the cup. The cup looks like a cup. Fine, she says. All right. We'll keep records. She retrieves a camera from the desk, Cassian's old one, metal-bodied, weighty enough to be believed. She takes photographs of the bell, the chair, the salt line, the cup. She prints the photos on the little machine he loved because it smelled like ozone and patience. She tapes each print into the notebook with dates and times and a level of sarcasm that comforts her handwriting. Under the last photo, she writes, if you are Cassian, pick up the cup at 3:33 and place it on the table. If you are not, don't be a coward about it. She underlines coward twice. Then, after a hesitation, adds, please. The day moves along its scheduled tracks. She goes to the post office, where Mrs. Kiernan pretends not to be curious with a ferocity that is itself curious. She cleans the flue. She sharpens 2 pencils. She stands in the doorway to the bedroom and runs her fingers along the door's edge, where the paint goes rough. There is a hairline seam as if, long ago, someone once fitted a second door there and then took it away. At twilight, she calls the number from the flyer. It rings 4 times and then a voice says, Sable, like a password. This is Lena Merrick, Lena says, and here's how her name sounds like water leaving a hull. I think I live in a hinge. A small pause. Then, all the best houses do. Sable's voice is low and unrushed. She asks 3 precise questions. Is there a consistent time? Are there repeated objects? Does the change only confess itself in morning? Lena answers. Yes, a cup, other things too. Yes, always mornings. When we're asleep, we keep the world together with stories, Sable says. When we wake, we check the seams. Some houses, and Lena hears the smile here, or something like a memory of one, have better seam allowances than others. I can come tomorrow at dusk. It's good to meet the house near its breathing. They agree on a time. When Lena hangs up, she feels both reckless and unusually companioned, as if she has invited a violinist to a very small riot. The night before Sable arrives, Lena does not set up the chair, or the bell, or the salt. She wants to see what the house does when unobserved. Instead, she sits at the kitchen table with the old cup and a pitcher of water and practices humming into the rim the way Cassian used to do. Her first attempts are wrong. Too much throat, not enough patience. She tries again. The sound comes thin, and then, a clear tone that feels like standing under a single beam of sun in a cold room. She closes her eyes. The tone steadies. The house adjusts around it like upholstery learning a new weight. MNNNN. She breathes, and in that vibration a memory unfurls. Cassian at this very table, 2 winters ago, cheeks pink from weather, circling his fingertip on a wineglass rim as if polishing the day. Listen, he had said. Every glass has its note. You just have to match it until the glass remembers itself. Match it until the glass remembers itself. The radio, unplugged, clicks. Her eyes open to quiet and a ridiculous certainty, like knowing you've left the iron on when you haven't, that someone standing just behind her is also listening, head cocked, approving. She does not turn around. She cannot bear the simulation of a presence with no body. Instead, she stops humming, and the cup's little voice collapses into plain water. Tomorrow, she tells the air, we will be rigorous. We'll bring a stranger with instruments. You'll like that, won't you? From the hall, the stair answers with 2 ticks that are not, strictly speaking, necessary. At 3:33, the house breathes. This time, the front latch never touches the strike plate. The floorboard lowers and lifts again, undecided. The pantry hushes expectant. The cup on the table, the old blue ivy cup, turns a 1/4 inch with a small ceramic shot. Lena lies very still and thinks, with a clarity as sharp as a bright nail, if you are him, come as you always did, quietly, a little late, not wanting to wake me. If you are not him, bring me proof that I can live with. The bed answers, not with words but with gravity. The hollow beside her remembers a shoulder and then forgets it just as fast, like a wave proofreading the shore. Morning opens its eyes, unmerciful and golden. There is a new ring on the table, nested within the last 2, a bullseye of damp that dries even as she watches, leaving a pale watermark like a target she did not agree to paint. She photographs it. She writes it down. At 5:52 p.m., Sable arrives in a boxy car that looks like an instrument case on wheels. She is taller than Lena expected, with dark, precise eyes that give the impression of seeing the edges of things. She brings a metronome, 3 small bells, a coil of red thread, a notebook, and a tape recorder that has been mended with gold, the repairs intentional and proud. Your house breathes? Sable asks in the entry, not unkindly, as she unlaces her boots. At 3:33, every night. Lena hears the grammar of relief in her own voice. Someone else is here now. The world must accept a second witness. Sable touches the wall beside the stair with the back of her fingers the way a baker tests a cake for warmth. Good lungs in these walls, she says. Salt air makes good lungs. She steps into the kitchen, nods once at the old cup on the table as though recognizing a species. We'll start with listening. They set the metronome on the mantel, its pendulum a bright, patient heart. Sable runs the red thread from the bedroom door to the foot of the bed, ties a bell in the middle so it will sing at even a breath of movement. She salts the thresholds without being asked. She places the repaired tape recorder on the table and presses 2 buttons at once. The machine purrs as if satisfied to be asked again. What does it remember? Lena asks. Everything I let it, Sable says. Everything I can bear to hear. They sit at the table as the dark installs itself outside, snugly, with the confidence of night. Sable asks questions in an order that feels like a spell. When did he vanish? 3 years, 8 months, and 11 days ago. At dawn, during a squall that wasn't on the radio. How often do you pretend he is here as you fall asleep? Every night, or he might not be. Does it make the mornings worse?
Yes.
But it also gives the night a spine. Sable nods, satisfied. She writes, repetition equals structure and structure equals passage, and underlines the equal signs as if she distrusts them but has found them useful. What do you believe? Lena asks finally, challenging and pleading both. About what happens. Sable thinks for a long moment. The metronome speaks. The tape recorder remembers. I believe some houses are built over old breaths, she says at last. And if someone loves hard enough inside them, the breaths keep wanting to be bodies. The question isn't whether he's here. Her gaze lifts, steady. It's whether the house wants you to keep him.
Keep him.
As if he were a stray dog or a storm. The clock coughs. 3:31. They prepare, which mostly means they agree to be very still. 3:32. Sable rests her fingertips lightly on the red thread. Lena places her palm on the hollow in the bed and does not think, come back. She thinks instead, show yourself true. 3:33. The house breathes. It is different with 2 listeners. The breath comes in, fuller, as if the cottage expands 2 ribs wider to accommodate scrutiny. The latch loosens. The hallboard lowers. The pantry inhales. The bell on the thread sings, very slightly, a small metallic bird clearing its throat. The metronome keeps its strict time and then, startlingly, misses a beat and corrects, a tiny stammer that feels like a heart skipping for joy or warning. The tape recorder purrs and then clicks, the wheel catching a snag of memory in its path. On the kitchen table, the old blue ivy cup turns another 1/4 inch, humble as moonlight. Sable's head tilts. She does not smile. She writes, rotational intent and, beneath it, agency? Lena's palm cools. The hollow beside her organizes itself into shape just long enough for weight to become meaning. The contour of a shoulder, the slope of a collarbone, the particular slight of a man who is always a little colder than he should be because he insisted on the sea's company. Cass, she starts, and Sable's hand lifts. Not now, not a name, not yet. The bell on the thread rings once, sweet and single. From the radio, which is unplugged and turned toward the wall, a wash of static rises like wind in a wheat field. It parts. A voice, almost Cassian's, half made of distance, says, nah. The door. Silence knits itself closed. Sable is already moving, not rushing, moving the way you do in a museum when you're afraid of waking up a painting. She stands at the bedroom door, not touching it, face close. There's a seam in your paint, she says, delighted and grave. Do you see it? Here. Lena does. She has always felt it with her fingertips, the slight burr, the misplaced mouth of wood beneath gloss. Tonight the seam looks like a grin someone tried to make straight. Sable steps back and lifts the metronome from the mantel. She places it on the floor exactly, where the hallboard lowers at 3:33. When the house breathes again, HHH, the metronome's bass sinks a fraction and then rises. There's a hollow, Sable says softly, reverently. Not under the floor. Between the walls. Between, Lena repeats, and something in her that has been tight for years unknots and hisses like a kettle taken off the boil. Between is a place you can visit if you're careful. Between is a place you can leave. Sable turns off the metronome. The world contains its own heartbeat again. Tomorrow, she says, we'll listen where the gap is widest. Lena nods, not trusting her throat. She looks at the old cup. It is resolutely, infuriatingly a cup. In the morning, the ring on the table has dried to a pale circle like a moon drawn by a child. Sable prints the tape's contents on a palimpsest of paper that smells like dust and lemon oil. She writes down the word door in Lena's notebook and underlines it 3 times. Doors are opinions, Sable says, tying the red thread back into a coil. They open for some and not for others. But every door is 2 arguments having a boundary. usually an argument between stay and go. Lena traces the underlined word with the back of her nail. If the house wants to keep him, she says, what does it want from me? Probably what houses always want, Sable says, slipping her boots back on. For you to live in it exactly the way you did when you were happiest. That's how it remembers the shape. Lena imagines herself as a template, a stencil of a life filled in with breath not hers. She looks at the cup, one more circle within circles, and for the first time since Cassian walked into a weather that did not announce itself, she feels a clear, angry thought. I don't want to be a battery, she says. Sable's smile is like a match struck in a cave. Good. Anger is excellent ballast. When Sable leaves, promising nothing, Lena walks to the bedroom door and sets her ear against the seam she has always felt and never truly admitted. The wood is cool. Inside it there is, or there is not, a draft that feels like a sigh that hasn't decided which direction to go. You said door. Lena tells the absence inside the wall. But is it for me, or for you? The house is quiet, but not indifferent. It is the quiet of a stage before the curtain, of a held breath before the name in the dark, of a patient animal deciding whether to stay. Behind the seam, something as small as a teacup turns a quarter-inch toward the light. Dawn arrived that day with a kind of politeness, gray light slipping in like an apology it didn't mean. Lena sat at the kitchen table, the notebook open to Sable's neat handwriting. One word glared from the page like a prophecy whispered too soon.
Door.
She drew a small sketch beside it, a rectangle, a hinge, a hollow space. Then she wrote beneath it, if the door is between, perhaps I've already walked through it once and never came back. The house, as if flattered by being written about, sighed through the rafters. Lena set her pen down. Don't preen, she told it. The air inside the cottage had changed since Sable's visit. It had texture now, thicker, like soup that had started to remember what it used to be. When she moved through the rooms, her own footsteps echoed differently. Once, sound had simply died in these walls. Now it seemed to return, faintly delayed, as though she were walking alongside herself a second behind. That morning she found something new. The attic hatch, which had refused to open for years, now hung slightly ajar, a finger-width gap, black as ink. Dust rained down whenever she spoke beneath it, as though a sleeping animal had shifted in its bed. Lena fetched the step stool, half praying, half muttering. If this is about to become some Poe business, I want advance notice. The hatch creaked open. Cold air rushed down, a smell of tin and paper and long-kept silence. She pulled the cord that hung like a throat, and a bare bulb flickered to life. Boxes, old trunks, and what looked like a dead radio colony filled the rafters. But there, in a metal milk crate, were cassette tapes. 23 of them, stacked like vertebrae, each labeled in Cassian's sharp handwriting, except for one detail. The dates were wrong. Each bore a date from after the day he vanished. Lena's heart stuttered. She ran a trembling thumb along the top label. January 19th. Wind, 3:33 a.m. Then the next. January 20th. Footfall/hum. And the next. January 21st. Lena talks in sleep. Her name. Her voice. Recorded by no one alive. She carried the crate downstairs, dust marking her clothes like she'd been blessed or accused. The house creaked as she descended, each step echoing like a slow applause. She set the crate on the table beside the blue ivy cup. The cup gleamed innocently. Don't look at me like that, she said to it. You started this. Lena still owned an old tape deck. Cassian had bought it from a thrift store for nostalgia, he'd said, the same week the world turned digital. She pushed a cassette into the deck and pressed play. At first, nothing but the soft scratch of magnetized dust. Then, faint, rhythmic, the sound of the house breathing. 3:33 a.m., caught in miniature. The latch loosening. The board lowering. The air moving through the pantry. And then a voice, a man's voice, warm but blurred by distance. Stay. Just stay. Her throat tightened. Cassian's voice. And yet not quite. Something was off, as though someone else were doing an impression of him from memory. She let the tape run. After the voice, she heard herself, asleep, murmuring nonsense, fragments of sea weather, bits of half-dreamed sentences. And then the voice again, nearer. She can't hear me.
Not yet.
Tell her. The tape cut off. Lena sat motionless, pulse racing in her wrists.
She rewound.
Played again. Same pattern. Same voice. Same break. Tell her what? She whispered, pressing a fingertip to the speaker grill as if it could yield. The air around her prickled. The cup on the counter gave a small tick. She turned sharply toward it. It hadn't moved, but something in the air near it, was listening. She played the next tape. This one began with rain. Heavy, intimate rain, like a curtain being drawn around a secret. Then a soft rustle. Fabric? A man's breath. And then the unmistakable sound of someone walking down the hall in the cottage, the timing of each step exactly the same as hers, when she walked it at night. The house keeps it, said Cassian's almost voice. It keeps the warmth. It keeps the time. Don't open the second door yet. The second door. Lena froze. Sable, she whispered. There's more than one. She called Sable that afternoon. Her hands trembled so badly, she misdialed twice. When Sable arrived at dusk, she brought a stethoscope, 2 small recorders, and a look of quiet expectation. She listened to the first tape without expression, only occasionally closing her eyes as though feeling for the rhythm beneath the sound. Someone recorded this inside your dreams, Sable said finally. That's not a thing, Lena protested. Sable raised an eyebrow. Neither is your cup performing jazz at 3:33 a.m., and yet. Lena almost laughed and then didn't. Sable pressed the stethoscope to the kitchen wall and frowned. You hear that?
Lena leaned in.
A low, steady thrum, not pipes, not wind. Like a heartbeat, distant but deliberate. It's keeping time, Sable murmured. Something behind the walls is counting with you. They recorded through the night. Sable's second tape deck captured hours of breathing, knocks, half-formed voices. At 3:33, as if on cue, the air shifted, denser, fragrant with the salt of unseen waves. The radio flared to life on its own. Lena, the voice said, you have to keep writing. That's how I find you. The house pulsed once, the bulb flickered, and the tape snapped in two, burnt clean through the middle. The smell of ozone filled the room. Sable exhaled softly, almost reverently. It's a correspondence, she said, between here and whatever keeps him. A correspondence? Lena echoed. He's writing back? Or the house is, Sable said. Maybe both. The next morning, Lena awoke with pen marks on her fingers and notebook pages she didn't remember writing. Sentences slanted across the paper in 2 handwritings, hers and one that wasn't quite Cassian's. If you want to see me, you must remember what it looked like to wake up beside me. She dropped the pen, breath catching. The old cup on the table was filled halfway with seawater. She hadn't brought any in. That night, Sable placed small bells in each room and told Lena to stay awake if she could. But by 3:20, sleep had her anyway, deep and strange, full of tide sounds and glass harmonies. In her dream, Cassian stood at the foot of the bed, whispering, You're walking backward. Every time you remember, I get closer. When she woke, the notebook lay open on her chest, her pen still wet, written across the page in her own hand. Tomorrow, the door between footsteps. She hadn't written that, but her pen had. And so begins the catalog, the archive of mornings. A record of each dawn where something small is out of place. A damp footprint that dries before she can trace it. A humming from the walls that matches her pulse. The cup, always turning a fraction more toward the door. Sable returns every evening, their partnership deepening into something between science and superstition. They number the mornings. They mark the shifts. Each day the house grows more fluent. By the 13th entry, Lena notes something chilling. It's not that the house moves toward me. It's that I wake up closer to it. The air grows colder.
The seam in the wall expands.
Behind it, something begins to breathe in harmony with her. And when the clock strikes 3:33 again, the voice returns on the radio, soft and almost kind. You're almost here. Don't stop remembering. The bulb above her flickers. The notebook flips a page on its own. And written there, fresh, in salt-damp ink, it began with silence. Not the kind that follows noise, but the kind that waits for something to fill it. Sable was gone. The storm that had draped the cliffs for 13 nights had finally burned itself away, leaving the sea calm and deceitful. Lena stood barefoot in the kitchen, her notebook open to its last page. The words written there were not hers. The house remembers how it ends. You only have to walk it one more time. Every room smelled of salt and winter. The cups, the bells, the thread, the camera, all quiet now. The house no longer needed to show off. It had her attention entirely. She moved through the room slowly, as if retracing the path of an old dance. One hand brushing the stair rail, the left boot first on the creaking board. A glance toward the door that had never opened. At each familiar step, the air grew warmer, almost affectionate. The walls pulsed with a slow rhythm of sleep. And then, when she reached the seam in the bedroom wall, the one Sable had found, the breath of the house deepened. It was no longer just wood and wind. It was lungs. It was waiting. Cassian, she whispered. The wall exhaled. A fine mist rose from the floorboards, curling around her ankles like memory. She pressed her palm to the seam, and the paint beneath her hand softened, rippling like water. Behind it, she saw light. A room that was not a room, glowing faintly with the color of dreams before waking. It smelled like rain and warm tea. Cassian's smell. She stepped through. Inside, time had no edge. Everything was made of echo, walls breathing in tandem with her, floorboards humming with her heartbeat. And there he was, sitting at the table as though he'd only paused between sentences. Lena, he said, and his smile was both exactly right and entirely wrong. The light bent around him like a memory that refused to fade. You stayed, she said, her voice trembling. All this time. I didn't stay, he said softly. You did. The words landed like pebbles on deep water. She realized, every night she had imagined him, she had given the house another piece of herself. The breath she'd been hearing wasn't Cassian's at all. It was hers, repeated until it belonged to the walls. I thought if I kept remembering you. You did, he said. Too well. The air shimmered. The house around them flexed, proud of its creation. 1,000 mornings, 1,000 almosts, all built from her refusal to let go. You can stay, Cassian said. Stay, and the house will keep breathing for both of us. Lena closed her eyes. She thought of coffee that tasted of solitude, of notebooks filled with ghost handwriting, of the way the sea looked when it finally stopped arguing with the wind. No, she said. I think it's time to wake up. She turned toward the wall. It pulsed like a heartbeat, hesitant to release her. Thank you, she whispered to the house, to him, to herself, and stepped forward. The breath of the house drew in sharply, like surprise. Then it let her go. Morning. Real morning, unsoftened, unhaunted. The cottage stood still, its silence now clean. The clock ticked like an honest clock. The cup on the table sat empty, plain, unremarkable. Lena sat by the window, the sea below her a vast white hush. On the table lay her notebook, open to the final entry, written in her own hand, steady and certain. He isn't gone. He's finished. And so am I. Outside, the wind changed direction. The house gave one last, tiny sigh, not the haunted kind this time, but the kind a body gives when it's finally free to rest. Lena smiled. Goodbye, she said. And the house, finally mercifully, did not answer.